The lamp was still burning at 10 o'clock when Major Elias Cord set the paper flat on his desk and looked at it. He had read it twice. The fort was quiet around him. The last of the yard sounds gone. The fire in the stove doing its slow work. The order was 2 paragraphs long. He could have read it in 30 seconds. He had not read it in 30 seconds because some documents require a different kind of attention. The kind where a man has to decide what he already knows before he can decide what to do. The order directed him to burn a Navajo settlement 3 miles east of the fort. It cited the settlement as a staging point for raids on a supply route. It was signed by a colonel at the district command in Albuquerque, whose name Cord had seen on 2 prior land orders, both of which had resolved within the year, in favor of private survey interests. The order was clear. It was lawful. It was wrong. He had ridden that country since his first week at the post. He knew the settlement, the cook fires visible from the mesa at first light, the children who worked in the creek bed in the afternoons, the headman Nez, who spoke careful English and watched everything with the patience of a man who had watched a great deal already and had learned what watching cost. He had ridden the supply route cited in the order, in both directions, more than once, and the raids documented as originating from the settlement were raids he had documented in his own field reports as coming from a different quarter entirely. He had the records. He had prepared a 7-page assessment with every relevant document attached and filed it through proper channels. The district command had sent the order back through a different officer with a note that said his assessment had been reviewed and rejected. Cord sat with that for 1 evening. He did not pace, and he did not draft letters he did not intend to send. He sat at the desk until the lamp needed trimming, and looked at the order in front of him and thought, with the precision of a man who had long since stopped being able to afford inexact thinking, about the specific cost of the specific thing being asked, and about the specific cost of the specific thing he was considering doing instead. He thought about what he was prepared to live with and what he was not. He thought about the settlement 3 miles out in the dark, the cook fires banked for the night, the children asleep in the structures he had been ordered to burn. In the morning, he saddled his horse alone and rode east. The settlement was 3 miles out, and he reached it as the light was coming up. The air cold enough to see his breath and the breath of the horse moving in small clouds. The smoke from the cook fires rising straight in the still air. He rode in without announcing himself, and the settlement read him before he had gone 20 yards. The children stopped what they were doing. 2 men he recognized moved toward him at a pace that was deliberate and not hurried, and one of them went to find Nez. Cord dismounted and stood with his horse and waited. Nez came out of the largest structure and stood in front of it and looked at Cord for a moment with the steadiness of a man reading something that has not yet declared itself. Then he walked forward until they did not need to raise their voices. Cord told him what had been ordered. He said it plainly, without softening it, without making it into anything other than what it was. He said the order had come from the district command in Albuquerque. He said he had objected through formal channels, and the objection had been rejected. He said he would not carry the order out. He said that last part the same way he said everything, level, without theater, not as reassurance and not as a promise requiring something in exchange. As fact, stated to the person most entitled to hear it stated plainly. Nez listened to all of it without speaking. When Cord was done, there was a silence that was not uncomfortable, but had weight in it, the silence of a man who has heard something real and is letting it settle before he decides what it means. Around them, the settlement had gone still in the particular way of a place that is listening without being asked to. The smoke from the fires kept rising. Then, Nez said something quietly in Navajo to the man beside him, and the man moved away. He looked at Cord. He said he understood. Cord nodded. He mounted and rode back to the fort and wrote a formal objection to the district command and a separate letter to the territorial governor's office that was calm in its language and absolute in its position. He filed both before sundown. He said nothing to anyone about the ride. The next morning, before the light had fully come up, the sentry on the eastern wall called down to the yard. Cord went up. They were already there. 250 warriors spread across the flat ground outside the eastern gate in a line that went wider than the gate itself, wider than the palisade wall on either side of it. The cold morning air sat over everything. No sound from the line, no movement. Just the particular stillness of a very large number of people who had arrived in the dark and were prepared to wait as long as waiting was required. The garrison came to the walls. Cord heard them behind him. The small sounds of men finding positions, the specific sounds of readiness that a man learned to catalog without deciding to. And he looked out at the line and then at the walls on either side and said, in a voice that carried without being raised, that no one was to do anything. He stood on the palisade and looked out at the flat ground. The light was coming up slowly behind the mesa to the east, going from cold gray to the pale gold that preceded full morning. And in that light the line was very clear and very still. 250 people. No banners, no weapons raised, no performance of any kind. Just the line and the stillness of it, and the smoke from the settlement's fires, visible 3 miles out on the horizon, going straight up the way it always had. Hostinaze was at the front. He stood with the quality of a man who had decided exactly how long he would stand there, and was entirely prepared to stand there that long and longer, if it came to it. He looked at Cord on the wall. Cord looked back. What passed between them in that regard was not a negotiation. It was not a threat, and it was not a ceremony. It was a reckoning of a particular kind, the kind that requires a witness on both sides and cannot be adequately expressed in any form other than presence. The man on the wall had done a costly thing, a specific and costly thing, and the 250 people standing in the early light had not come to threaten, and had not come to celebrate, and had not come to offer any formal arrangement. They had come because certain accountings require witnesses, because a man who had defied his command once could be ordered to defy it again. And the people whose home stood 3 miles to the east had a right to see his face in the morning light and to let him see theirs, and to know on both sides what had been understood and what would not be forgotten. Cord stayed on the palisade. The garrison stayed at the walls. Nobody spoke. The light kept coming up. The smoke kept rising from the fires on the horizon, unchanged, and that was the whole of it, that the smoke was still rising, from the same fires, on the same ground, and everyone standing in the cold that morning understood what it meant that this was still true. They stood for 1 hour. Then Hostinaze turned, and the line turned with him, and they moved back across the flat ground with the same deliberateness they had arrived with, and the distance took them one by one until the flat ground outside the gate was empty again, and the cold morning air was just cold morning air. Cord stood on the palisade a while after. He looked at the empty ground. He looked at the smoke on the horizon. Then he came down and went to the office and wrote a field report in 140 words, the number of warriors, the duration, the headman's position at the front of the group, the direction they went when they left. Facts only. He did not write what it felt like to stand on the palisade wall in the cold light looking out at 250 people whose home he had refused to burn. He did not write what moved across his face when the line finally turned, or what he understood in that hour about what kind of man he was trying to be and what being that man was going to keep costing him. He left all of that in the unwritten space around the 140 words. He filed the report. The district command did not respond to it and did not send anyone to enforce the order it had issued. It sent no acknowledgement. It sent no further instructions. It sent nothing, which was itself a kind of response, the response of an institution that has decided to allow a thing it cannot officially permit to continue, as though it has not noticed the thing is continuing. In the months that followed, the situation settled into something that was not peace and was not war, but was a durable arrangement. built on the specific knowledge on both sides of what the man at Canyon Diablo was and was not prepared to do. Hostinez began appearing at the fort's eastern gate on the first Tuesday of each month. He and Cord would ride out together and come back a few hours later, and neither of them said much about where they had been. The younger soldiers eventually stopped watching the gate when Hostinez arrived. This was the real measure of the arrangement, not any document, not any formal agreement, but the morning the soldiers stopped watching. 9 months later, on a Thursday in late October, the coach from Santa Fe arrived at 3:30 in the afternoon. There were 11 passengers. Clara Holt was the last one off. She came down the steps with a carpet bag in one hand and a small trunk balanced against her hip, in a dress that had been pressed before the journey and had not survived it. She was 31 years old, had been traveling for 9 days, and wore that knowledge in the set of her shoulders, not collapsed, not rigid, but level in the way of a woman who has decided in advance not to fall apart. The fort at Canyon Diablo was not what the letter had described. The letter, written in a hand she had since identified as belonging to a post clerk and not to the commanding officer himself, had called it a garrison outpost with civilian administrative functions. What she found was a collection of adobe structures inside a timber palisade, a stable that smelled of October, and an administrative office sharing its western wall with the sutler's store. A man named Alderman was smoking on the office steps. He said the commanding officer was in the field. He said he had not been told about any civilian records assistant. Clara set her trunk in the dust. She looked at the office, the palisade wall, the mountains past the eastern wall, already going dark at the peaks. She told Alderman she would wait inside. She went in. The office held 3 desks. 2 were buried under 2 years of unsorted paper. The third had a lamp, a reasonably clear surface, and a chair that did not wobble when she tested it, which she did before sitting down. She looked at the buried desks, survey map tubes on the left pile, correspondence envelopes at the edges of the middle stack, ruled ledger pages visible under the third, and then she stood back up and began a condition assessment. Cord returned at sundown with 12 men and 2 scouts and came through his own office door to find a woman he had not expected until December, who had been working there for 2 hours and had filled 3 pages with notations on the state of his filing. She told him who she was and what she had come for, and that if there was a confusion, she would appreciate knowing what kind. He said the confusion was his. She showed him the notations. He said that was fine and arranged for someone to show her to her quarters. He left a tin cup of coffee on the clean desk before she arrived the next morning. He was already at his own desk when she came in. Neither of them mentioned the coffee. That was how it began. The rhythm of the post established itself around her over the first week without ceremony. Reveille at 5:30, which she found she woke before without difficulty. The smell of Haverford's coffee moving through the cold air before the mess door opened. The sound of the horses in the stable and the blacksmith's hammer starting up by 7. Cord left the office mid-morning most days with Blaine or with the scouts and came back before noon and worked through the afternoon. He did not explain his schedule. She did not ask. The work she was doing was independent of his movements, and she had enough of it to fill the days without assistance. What she noticed in the first week was that he read, not correspondences, those he moved through quickly, signing or setting aside. The documents he slowed for were the survey maps, the land records, the older territorial agreements that she found in the least organized sections of the buried desks. He would stand at the window with one of these in his hand sometimes, not reading it so much as looking at it, in the way of a man checking a document against something he already knows. She filed this observation without acting on it, the way she filed most observations. The backlog was serious. 2 years of requisition orders, territorial correspondence, land survey records, and a large volume of documents she identified after 3 days as Cord's own field reports, written in a compressed and functional hand and organized by nothing except the order in which they had been completed. She began building an index. The work was real, and it required sustained attention, and she found she needed that. Ohio had given her a particular kind of clarity about which surfaces bore weight. The dissolution was correctly filed, and she did not regret it. But what it had left behind was a specific need for ground that held. Here, the filing was either in order or it was not. The stove either worked or it did not. The difference mattered, and she could breathe in a room where the difference mattered. The post had 38 soldiers, Alderman the sutler, a blacksmith named Pettit, a cook named Haverford, who had been at the fort since before Cord's arrival, and 2 children. Haverford's son Tobias was 9 and had the quality of a boy who had learned to read rooms before he learned to read books. Maggie was 5, the daughter of a corporal and his wife, and had not yet acquired the habit of wanting things quietly. Maggie followed Clara into the office on the 3rd day, sat in the corner, and accepted the blank page and pencil stub. She drew a horse for 45 minutes, and then announced that Clara's dress was very plain. Clara said she found plain dresses useful. Maggie said her mother's dress had flowers on it. Clara said that sounded appropriate for a dress that had not traveled 9 days in a coach. Maggie was quiet for the rest of the afternoon, which Haverford said later was unusual. Tobias came to the doorway on the 4th morning and refused the offered pencil, but stayed in the threshold for 20 minutes before leaving. He came back the 5th morning and stood closer. The 6th morning he came inside and sat at the far desk and watched her work, and she let him watch and did not perform for him. On the 8th day, she asked him to hold the other end of a document she was trying to flatten. He held it. On the 11th day, he sorted a stack of papers by date without being asked. She said thank you. He went back to his chair, picked up the pencil, and began drawing something she could not see and did not ask about. By the 15th day, he was arriving before her. The flagged documents would be stacked with numbers in the upper right corners according to her index system, which she had explained to him once without asking him to remember it. She looked at the numbers, looked at him. He was at the far desk, already working. She said the numbers were correct. He did not respond. She sat down and began. There was a sergeant named Blaine who liked to understand arrangements quickly and found Clara's arrangement resistant to quick understanding. On the 14th day he asked her, in a voice pitched for the room, what exactly she had been sent to do. She said she had been sent to build a record system that could survive a change of command, so that whoever came after Major Cord would not spend his first 6 months reading backward through 2 years of unsorted paper. Blaine said that was a great deal of confidence in the post's permanence. She said she had noticed a considerable investment in the palisade wall, which suggested some interest in the idea. A soldier at the back of the room almost smiled. Blaine left. The post Clara was learning had a particular relationship with the country outside its walls. The 2 Navajo scouts who rode with Cord's column, Hastin Nez, and a younger man named Running Water, whose English came and went depending on his interest in the conversation, moved through the fort with an ease that was not deference and not performance. They ate with the soldiers sometimes. They did not eat with the soldiers other times. Nobody commented on either. Pettit the blacksmith had made a repair on one of their saddle rings early in the fall and had been paid in a piece of worked turquoise that he wore now on a cord around his neck and never explained. These were the small signs of a post that had been at peace long enough for the peace to become ordinary, ordinary enough that the soldiers had stopped remarking on it and started taking it as the texture of their days. What the index was showing her, by the end of the first month, was the history of the previous January. She read Cord's field reports in sequence, and the sequence told the story, the formal objection, the 7 pages of documentation. The order returned with the district command's rejection noted in the margin, and then the 140-word field report from the morning after. She read the report twice. Number of warriors, duration, headman's position at the front of the group, direction they went when they left, facts only, nothing before and nothing after. She found the missing element in the 4th stack of the second desk, a witness statement written for an unrelated purpose. the detail she was looking for buried in a subordinate clause, almost incidental. He had ridden out alone. The morning before the warriors appeared at the gate, Cord had saddled his horse by himself and ridden to the settlement and told the headman what had been ordered and what he would not do. And then he had ridden back and filed the objection, and none of his field reports contained a single word of it. He had written about the morning and left out the day before entirely. She cross-referenced the full sequence. She built a timeline. She noted the colonel's signature appearing in 2 earlier land disputes and flagged the pattern. She filed the entire record under 3 headings and said nothing about any of it to Cord. A man who wrote 140 words about 250 people standing outside his gate and omitted entirely the day before, the ride out alone, the conversation, the part where he chose, was a man who understood that some things did not require annotation to be understood by whoever was paying careful attention. She was paying careful attention. She left it where he had put it. The difficulty arrived in December in the form of a man named Harlan Voss. He came with 2 assistants and a letter of introduction and a manner practiced at occupying more room than he held. He was perhaps 45, with a suit that showed the creasing of travel and a face arranged into the permanent expression of a man who expects importance to be recognized before it has been earned. He had a survey authorization covering a land corridor that included the eastern settlement, specific in some places, carefully unclear in others, written to be contested after the fact. Cord read it twice and set it down. He said the eastern settlement sat under a prior agreement with the Navajo agency filed with the district command in May. He said assessing an agreement and surveying occupied settlement land were different things, and he would write to confirm the authorization's actual scope before permitting either. Voss said he had a letter from the district command. Cord said the letter authorized a survey, and that authorizing a survey was not the same as directing a specific survey of a specific location, and that the district command would recognize the distinction if he asked them directly. He said Voss was welcome to stay at the fort while he waited for their response. Voss glanced at Clara. She was working. He said he would be back. He left his papers. In the weeks that followed, the fort carried a particular quality of waiting. Cord wrote his letters. He received no response from the district command for 10 days, and then a brief acknowledgement that said only that his inquiry was being reviewed. He filed the acknowledgement. Clara indexed it. The authorization papers Voss had left sat in the index under their cross-reference, and every morning Clara passed them in the sequence of her work, and every morning they said the same thing they had said the day before, that the language was unclear in exactly the places it would need to be clear to do what Voss intended, and that whoever had written the authorization had written it that way on purpose. She did not say this to Cord. He had read the documents himself, and he was not a man who missed deliberate ambiguity. What she noticed in those weeks was that the soldiers were paying attention. Not in the way they had paid attention when she arrived, which was the attention of men assessing a new variable. This was the attention of men who had learned what kind of officer they had and were watching to see whether the thing they thought was true would hold under this particular pressure. Blaine came through the office more than usual. He did not say anything. He read the duty rosters on the far wall and left. She understood this. She had them copied, indexed, and cross-referenced against the May agreement documents before the day was done. She flagged 4 sections she judged specifically ambiguous. She wrote a clean summary of the prior agreement, every authorization number, the signing officer's name and title, every relevant filing in chronological order, and organized the full record so any reviewing party could follow it from the first document to the last without anyone's assistance. She left the summary on the clean desk and said nothing about it. Voss came back in the second week of January with a different letter, District Command, addressed to Cord, directing him to extend surveying access to any contractor holding an existing authorization. Brief. Signed by the colonel whose name appeared twice already in her cross-reference index. both preceding land resolutions favorable to private interests, within 18 months precisely. He handed it to Cord in the office with Blaine and 2 soldiers and aldermen present, and then said, in a voice pitched to Carey, that he had been informed the Post's records assistant had been filing under a name appearing on a dissolution notice in the Ohio County records, and that her presence at a military installation in an administrative capacity might warrant review by the territorial office. He held the district letter in the manner of a man who mistakes a document for a conclusion. The room went quiet. Clara finished the line she was writing. She set down her pen. She closed the ledger. She stood. She said her dissolution notice was correctly filed under her own name, and not her former husband's, a matter of public record at the Lucas County Courthouse for 17 cents, and she would provide the document number to any office requesting a review. She looked at Voss. She said she had indexed, cross-referenced, and summarized the prior land agreement in full. Every authorization number present, the signing officer named, every filing from May forward in chronological order, and that if any element of Mr. Voss's survey authorization superseded the standing agreement with the Navajo agency, she had not found it, and she had examined everything available to examine. She sat back down. She opened the ledger. She picked up her pen. Cord told Voss, without raising his voice, that he would write to the Navajo agency to confirm the standing agreement and send the prior correspondence to the governor's office with a cover note, and that he would treat the existing arrangement as operative until those offices responded. Voss said that was not Cord's decision to make. Cord said he was aware of that, which was precisely why he was writing to the offices whose decision it was. He took out paper and began. Voss left. He took the district letter and left the authorization papers, and Clara added them to the index that afternoon. The Navajo agency's response came in 3 weeks. Standing agreement confirmed, authorization numbers cited. The position stated plainly that Voss's survey authorization did not supersede existing agreements with indigenous landholders. A finding the agency officer noted he had already communicated to the district command in writing and would communicate again. The governor's office followed within the week. Matter under review. No further survey access appropriate pending resolution. Voss did not return. The colonel, whose signature appeared 3 times in Clara's cross-reference, was transferred to a coastal posting before spring, described in the agency's subsequent correspondence as an administrative reassignment. The survey authorization was formally withdrawn. She noted both dates against her timeline, closed the cross-reference, and filed the closing documents at the front of the relevant section where any reviewing officer would find them first. Blaine began nodding when he passed the office door sometime in February. Haverford's supper portions had been generous for some time without comment on either side. Pettit said good morning in the yard. Alderman brought over the older supply boxes one afternoon unprompted and said she might want them for the index. She said she would. She built them in over 2 weeks, and the boxes extended the fort's history further back than the current records reached, and she read all of it with the same attention she gave to everything. And it completed the picture she had been assembling since November, a man who had walked into a badly wrong situation and had been, with no credit and no recognition, working steadily to make it right. Tobias had moved to the desk beside hers by a process that had no identifiable start date, only a state that one day simply was. He had developed a faster method for sorting one category of document, and she watched it and adjusted her own approach to use his logic. And he noticed she had done this, and she noticed that he had noticed, and neither of them said a word about it. He had also stopped drawing. At some point in February, he had put the pencil to other uses. He was working through the older supply boxes with her, sorting, writing index numbers on documents in the upper right corner with a consistency that required no correction. His handwriting was better than his mother's. She had noticed this and had not said so. He would discover it himself eventually, and discovering it himself would mean more. One afternoon, Haverford came to the office door and said Tobias was wanted for supper, and he did not look up from the stack he was working on. He said he would be there in a few minutes. Clara kept working. Haverford looked at the room for a moment. At her son at the desk beside the woman from Ohio, both of them looking at their respective papers, unhurried, settled, and then she went back to the mess and said nothing about what she had seen, and Clara did not see her face. And that was the right way for it to happen. Maggie came by most afternoons, rotating through a catalog of subjects that had long since moved past the dress. Pettit's singing voice, the names she had given the fort's horses, the sustained injustice of supper timing, raised approximately every third visit, with the consistency of a formal grievance. One afternoon she climbed into Clara's lap without asking, and put her chin on the edge of the desk and looked at the open ledger. She said Clara smelled like home now. She said it plainly, the way she said everything, with the particular certainty of a child who has not yet learned to want things quietly. Not a declaration, not a gift, just a fact observed and reported. The way she might report that it was cold or that Gerald had eaten his grain. Clara kept writing. Tobias, at the desk beside hers, kept working too. His pencil did not stop. But the set of him had shifted by the time she glanced over, and she looked back at her own work and left it where it was. March came cold and went warm in a week. The way that country changed. Not on any calendar, but in the smell of the air past the palisade wall, and in the quality of light on the eastern mesa. At the time she walked to the office each morning. Cord rode east with Hostines and 2 soldiers, the monthly routine it had become. She heard the horses when he came back at midday, and after a while, the office door opened, and he stood at his desk and worked through the flagged stack in the order she had numbered it. She had placed one document third, the agency letter confirming the colonel's transfer. The last entry in the cross-reference she had kept open since her first month at the post. She had thought about whether to flag it, and had flagged it anyway, because it meant something complete in the context of everything else in the index, and because she thought he should read it himself. He read it. He set it down. He picked up the 4th. He worked through the rest of the stack. When he was done, he sat. He was quiet in the way of a man registering the particular sensation of hands that are no longer holding something they have been holding for a long time. He said she had done good work. He said it plain, the way he said everything, a fact that had been accumulating quietly for some months now stated. She said, "Thank you." He said the post's annual review went to the Territorial Command in April, and that he was recommending the civilian records position be made permanent with adjusted compensation. She said she had prepared a draft of the review structure if he wanted to see it. He said that was fine. She put it on his desk. He was quiet again. He looked at the window. He said there was something else. He said it differently, not louder, but with a quality different from his usual voice. The way a man sounds when he has decided at the last moment to say the simpler version of a thing instead of the prepared one. He said the post was not comfortable and not always safe, and the winters were hard, and the command above him was unreliable, and the work came without recognition. He was not going to pretend otherwise. He said there were 2 children who had become accustomed to her presence, and a number of other people he did not need to name, and that he had himself become accustomed to working across from someone who could read a document and tell him in 2 sentences what it meant and what it was trying not to say. He said he had a house in Santa Fe with carpentry needed on the upper story, 3 years unaddressed. There was a room in it that had never been used as anything, and he thought it would make a good study. He said the children would need someone who stayed. He said she did not have to answer now. She said she did not need to wait. She said yes. He nodded. He picked up his pen. She picked up hers. Maggie's voice came in from the yard, addressed to the horse she had named Gerald, emphatic and one-sided, and entirely convinced of its own position. She was explaining something at length. The explanation had a structure to it, a grievance, evidence, a proposed resolution, and the horse was not offering a counter-argument, which Clara suspected Maggie found satisfying. The stove did what it was supposed to do. Tobias's pencil moved at the desk beside hers, steady, unhurried. The sound of a boy who had somewhere to be and had decided this was it. Cord turned a page at his own desk. Outside, a horse shifted in the stable. Pettit's hammer started up on something in the yard and stopped again after 3 strikes, which meant he had found the right angle and was satisfied. The fort, without making anything of it, went about its afternoon. Outside, past the eastern wall, 3 miles out across the juniper flats, the settlement's cook fires were going in the late morning air. The smoke rose straight and unhurried. The same smoke, from the same fires, on the same ground that had been standing since before the fort was built and was standing still. Clara finished the line. She turned the page and started the next one, and the house held its warmth around all of them, and nothing in it was waiting anymore. If this story settled something in you, leave a word below. It means more than you might think.